Outsiders. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips. The sin here is very specific. The distress is very specific. His distress in making this journey, in feeling unwelcome, in feeling unsettled, in feeling like he is not at home, is that he's literally being talked about. Deliver me from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. One commentator says something about this generally. Where do we feel less at home than when we are being talked about and lied about, right? And that's the pressure, that's the difficulty that he's feeling here. He wants to get out of this. He's tired of being the subject of conversation. He's tired of being the object of criticism, of lies, of deceit. Deliver me from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. And so he is feeling like an outsider, not only geographically, and he does feel like an outsider geographically. We know that from the text. Again, we'll study that in verse 5 through 7. But he feels like an outsider personally in his relationships. He's not treated with kindness. He's not treated with hospitality. He is an outsider, and he's made to feel that way. Perhaps you've ever had the experience of traveling to a foreign country or going somewhere else and there being a language barrier. And so you feel a relational and even a social distance from people just by nature of not being able to communicate with them. But in this case, they're not tourists who will be kind to him and just speak a different language. They want him gone. They want him to feel like an outsider. They are oppressing him. He is not welcome here. And the psalmist comforts himself by noting what will happen to these dishonest people. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue. So the outsider's distress leads into the resident's danger. So the outsider being the writer of the psalm, the Jewish person, journeying home, tapping into this longing to go home because he is an outsider. And he notes the destruction and judgment that will come on those who speak this way and ostracize the people of God. What shall be given to you? And what shall be done to you, deceitful tongue? A warrior's sharp arrows with glowing coals of the broom tree. In other words, the way that you are treating me will come back to you. And it will not come back to you in the form of armies. It will come back to you in the judgment of God. The pilgrim here is directing a question to the wicked and affirmed that the Lord will destroy them. The broom tree was the specific word that was used, or the specific wood that was used for firewood because it burned longer than other woods. So the imagery of sharp arrows and coals of fire, you see throughout the Old Testament when coals of fire are sent from heaven, obviously it's a sign of destruction, it's a sign of judgment. And so it speaks of God's retribution against these evil people. There is blessing to those who treat the people of God with blessing, and there is destruction to those who bring destruction to the people of God. So the outsider's greatest defense against his accusers is his God. And now you really we really move into his soul. So he speaks of his own distress, and then he turns this concern on to those who are inflicting danger upon him. And now we understand where this longing is coming from. Verse 7, woe to me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Now, the way that he says this makes it seem like these are places that are close together, but they are not. These places are actually, as the picture that's being given to us is, they are as far geographically away as could possibly be understood. In other words, there are people from all parts of this land, people of God from all parts of this land that are feeling this way. So he's lamenting having to dwell in the midst of people who hate peace. Meshach is mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 2. This is a grandson of one of Noah's sons, and it's a barbaric people who lived very far in the north. Kedar is in Arabia, and it's where nomadic Ishmaelites lived. We see this foundation of the Ishmaelites living in Kedar in Genesis 25. And so the psalmist was saying that these two names represent enemies surrounding the people of God. So he's not only speaking for himself, he's actually speaking of the plight of all of God's people. Not only is he an outsider, there are many who are God's who are feeling this way, ostracized, unwelcome. And note what he says in verse 7, verse 6, too long I have had my dwelling. This is where I have been. This is where I have made my residence among those who hate peace. Verse 7, he says, I am for peace. I would have peace with them. Israel being, intended to be a people of peace, but they are for war. Israel is to be characterized by shalom, but Gentile nations, these tribes, are characterized by violence and domination and war. And so you understand why the psalmist really wants to go home. You understand that as he describes the plight of his people, so you and I find ourselves in a similar spiritual circumstance, making our dwelling with people who hate peace, surrounded by darkness, desiring to make our way home, knowing that even the goodness of God in this life is just a taste of where he will bring us and how he will welcome us in the life to come. It's important, though, that we note one thing about one of the nations here that's mentioned, Kedar, this Arabic region. This is one of the nations specifically mentioned in Isaiah 60, that when the glory of Israel is revealed, these people will join Israel in their future glory. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 3, the nations shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising. That sets the context for all the nations he's about to mention. Verse 7, all of the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you, and the rams of Nebaioth shall minister to you. They shall come up with acceptance on my altar, and I will beautify my beautiful house. So I want to make sure we understand the progression of this context. The psalmist is writing the feelings, the distress, the struggle of being an outsider. And he points us forward to his desired dwelling, and the desired dwelling of all the people. It's to be in a place of peace, not in a place of war. And as they travel, as these people together progress toward the place of Jerusalem, to enjoy worship with one another, to enjoy a foretaste of their redemption is to come, and remembrance of their past as a people, one of the nations that is oppressing these people, the prophet tells us, will join him in the future gathering in final redemption. And so not only are we to imagine all of these people at a time in the past feeling the struggle of oppression, of war, of ostracization, As they journey home, we are to imagine a train of people joining Israel, including in this text those who made them their enemies. And then the way that you see that train of redemption when God beautifies his own house is that through Christ you can pick out yourself in the crowd. And as these tribes are gathered together in the future train of glorification, so you and I will be gathered. Spurgeon says of this psalm that only the wicked can be at home with the wicked. Our dwelling with them is trying, yet may be useful. For two reasons. One, useful to them. Two, useful to us. Because making our dwelling as pilgrims tries our graces, reveals our character, abates our pride, drives us to prayer, and makes us long to be at home. And I just want to walk through those. Because this psalm, it's definitely obscure. I was talking with Chris today. It gets buried by Psalm 119 and then totally overlooked because of Psalm 121. Everybody loves Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord. And people, it's like 120 is not even there between Psalm 119 and 121. But 120 brings us into 20. It helps us understand 121. Why do we need help? Because we're stuck on the outside. Because this life is dark. It's difficult. We feel weird because as we get more wicked, God says we are to be holy. Or as the world gets more wicked, God says we are to be holy. As we become like Him, the world becomes less like Him. And we feel the difficulty of that pressing in on us. This is why we need to, Psalm 121, look to the Lord for help, who made the heavens and the earth. So we can deeply empathize with the feeling of this text spiritually, though we may not be able to feel it geographically or like he did because our history may not be the same. I mean, can you imagine being Israel, always being away from home, being promised a home and then captivity, and then being exiled from that home, and hoping that, Ezra and Nehemiah, these types, hoping that a pagan king will let you go back home. Someone who's not even in your own people. You're asking an outsider in a land where you are an outsider if you can go back home. And so you can just imagine year after year after year. Sure, it's a family trip, so it's difficult. And we got to get all the stuff, and we got to get all the food packed, and we got to load the animal, we got to get the kids ready to go. But you can just imagine year after year after year, the joy and the anticipation in these people. We get to go back to Jerusalem. We get to remember. And it's but a foretaste of the joy in our own hearts and the anticipation of our own hearts that as we pilgrim through this life, there is a joy set before us, a glory that is not even that is beyond compare to the sufferings in this life. A home. And so Spurgeon says, to us it tries our graces. Even just what I began with, my introduction a few moments ago. In the place of wickedness, seems unsuspecting, subway, grace greatly on trial, and for whatever it is for you. In this life, this world, this culture, our sin, the sin within and the sin without, puts the grace of God to the test. And what we see time and time again is that grace will much more abound. You and I understand the grace of God better in this life because it is on full display in its conquering of sin, in its superiority over sin. This world reveals our character. We sojourn at home, the dwelling with the wicked in this life, and it's beneficial in revealing our character. This culture, the world around us, the frustration with the government, the continual moral denigration is just the hot water that your life, as the tea bag, that when it gets dropped into, it begins to reveal what's really there. And so what is really there? This world abates our pride. Making our dwelling with the wicked abates our pride. Because all around we see traces in the unsaved of pride that would have destroyed us apart from Jesus Christ. In ourselves. It causes us to live a life of humility and gratitude, knowing that every day lived in frustration and wickedness will one day be brought to culmination in absolute holiness. It drives us to prayer. I found myself just this morning, I found myself just confessing to the Lord my lack of prayer, and then immediately recognizing the countless areas of temptation that would face me that day, and just asking God, praying that God would help me pray. And that's just what goes on in here. That doesn't say anything of the world in which we're inhabiting, this life in which we dwell, that the temptation comes from out there too. And if I am weak and insufficient to handle the wickedness in here, certainly I must pray that God would strengthen me to face the wickedness and difficulty of this dirty home in which we dwell. And Spurgeon says, as we have been dealing with, it makes us long to be home. It makes us long to be home. This is something that even in my own heart and life, the Lord has been recently impressing upon me. Do I really, and do you truly desire the coming of the Lord? Because we would say yes, but how often do you ask for that? How often do you ask, even so, Lord, come quickly? Is that a regular aspect of your prayer? God, make all things new. Jesus, don't deny us your return anymore. Come quickly. And truly our life will be, as Lewis says, the beginning of the real story, in which every story goes on chapter after chapter without end, and which every chapter is better than the one before. That's the home that we wait for, that we want, that we desire. And you could make yourself, even in Christ, or Christ could make you in himself the most joyful person in this world, at most peace and most contentment with all the difficulties that you face. And I am more convinced that as you fall more in love with Christ and grow more in contentment with him, you will not grow more joyful in this one. You will only better anticipate the next one. Because as we grow in our love for Christ, he detaches every affection from this temporal, dirty home. And so we are called to seek the things which are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. And so it will cause us to live in every way differently. To quote Lewis again, I am convinced that those who have done the most for this present world are those who have thought most about the next. And as we grow in our love for God, and as we feel like strangers all the more in this home, this dirty home, this psalm reminds us that God alone offers the true hope of true home. God alone offers the true hope of true home. And one day, when He returns for us, and He leads captives in His way, and we gather with this glorious procession of saved Israel and saved Gentiles, yes, we will experience the greatness of victory, and we will see Christ the conqueror once and for all lay claim to what is His. But the most joyous and glorious return will be when we finally get to follow Him home. And there we will be with Him forever. Let's pray.